imagine there are random people, and you divide them into two groups. If they think of each other that they're friends, they will actually become friends. If they think of each other that they are enemies, they will also become enemies. This is a self-fulfilling forecast. And if these groups have leaders, it will be very easy for them to set these people against each other. So imagine this on the scale of countries and nations. It is very easy for the so-called elites in power to set the nations against each other. And there are many psychological phenomena that can help with this. The most powerful political weapon is not the gun or the bomb, it is the control of information. People are basically manipulated through the media and politics to follow what they are told. There is a classic experiment that is included in many social psychology textbooks. This experiment was carried out in an isolated children's camp where there were boys aged 11-12 years old, and they were divided into groups. In the first stage of the experiment, the researchers stimulated the formation of the group identity and friendship between the boys. And they were placed in different parts of the camp, and they didn't know about each other's existence. At the second stage of the experiment, the researchers tried to set the boys against each other and provoke the conflict between them. They were making competitions between them, they were awarding prizes to the winners. At first, the boys acted normally. They laughed at each other, but after a certain time, out-group hostility emerged. They described their teammates as brave and friendly, and the members of the other group as cowards. And when the researchers were asking who are your friends, the boys were naming only the members of their team. And at the third stage of the experiment, the researchers tried to reduce this out-group hostility through joint activities and games. And after a certain time, this hostility practically disappeared. Each group began to have a positive attitude towards the members of the out-group, and some even became friends with each other. So let's come back to the scale of nations and countries. Nationality is a fiction, but since everyone believes in their existence, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. A lot of things in life rest on our mutual faith in its existence. What are laws? It's just a thing that people came up with, and since everyone believes in their existence, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. What is a country? It is also a system that everyone believes it exists, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But one way or another, it's all fiction, and you can come up with any kind of group identities, you can divide people in any way you like, people take these divisions very seriously. Of course, some people really differ. For example, you can divide people into thin and fat, but these are just physical differences, and turning this into some kind of a group identity is a fiction. I want to mention right away that I'm not suggesting to abandon all these group identities and just think that we are all people. I'm suggesting to just find the balance between recognizing the reality of group identities and remembering about our shared humanity. I'm also suggesting to remember how different people are and how chaotic people are, because people's opinions change every time, people's emotions and mood change every time. And I also suggest to remember that each person is a separate person, and just don't shift the blame from one person to another just because of their same group identity. In most cases, they don't even know each other, and they cannot influence each other in any way. And finally, I suggest people to learn about all of these psychological phenomena that I want to talk about right now.
In-group favoritism.
Even without provoking any conflict between two groups, if you just take random people on the street and divide them into two groups, they will already show some in-group favoritism. Without any real reason, without any real differences, they will be just treating slightly better the members of their group than the members of the other group. This is proven by many experiments in social psychology.
Availability heuristic.
People overestimate the prevalence of what is easy to remember and what comes to mind easily. So if there is some very aggressive minority that might be just 1% of the total population, but it's too visible, it's too noticeable, which is why people will be significantly overestimate the size of this aggressive minority. And there are many surveys that show that people greatly overestimate the size of minorities that we hear often about. For example, there are very few billionaires in the world, but since we hear a lot about them, we significantly overestimate their real number. If you ask the question, what's the percentage of the world's population do you think are billionaires, the vast majority of people will greatly overestimate this percentage. In reality, there are more than 8 billion people in the world, while there are only $3,000 billionaires. The number of them is constantly changing due to fluctuations in the value of their assets, but let's round up to 3,000. So the real percentage of billionaires is 27,000 times less than 1%.
Negativity bias.
You may have already noticed that if you do a lot of good things, and then you make a mistake, people will remember only this mistake. And if you argue with people, they have very selective attention. If they try to prove that something is bad, they list all the bad things, ignore or downplay all the good things. So this is called negativity bias. People's tendency to pay more attention to the negative aspects of a certain event or a certain person, of basically everything.
Confirmation bias.
People are more likely to believe in information that proves their opinion, their point of view, their hypothesis, their belief, and less likely to believe anything that disproves this opinion, point of view, belief. So you can imagine when people divide themselves into good, us, and them, they are more likely to believe in information that proves that we are good and they are bad, and less likely to believe in information that disproves the fact that we are good and they are bad. So basically it's like everything I want to believe is true and everything I don't want to believe is all fake.
Personalization.
There is also a tendency for people to take things personally. So when someone makes a bad statement about a certain group, the people inside this group can see this as a personal attack. We can often hear how people say, you did it, we did it, even though there are very certain people who did it actually, and the rest of the people in this group have nothing to do with this, and they don't even know these people in most cases. So there are headlines like, China voted at the UN. In reality, it's just one person who votes at the UN from China. It's not a random person, but people just take it too seriously.
Perspective and misunderstanding.
This applies not only to intergroup conflicts, but to conflicts in general. Because conflict looks always different for one side of the conflict than how it looks for the other side. And if you have mental flexibility to put yourself in the shoes of the other side of the conflict, it can help you to better understand the people, it can help you to resolve these conflicts. But this is too hard, and most people won't even try. Another thing is poor communication. Whenever you speak to a person, they always perceive your message a little bit distorted. Even now, when I speak all this, everyone will get the message a little bit distorted, someone will completely twist everything I say. Of course, this will inflate the aggression in intergroup conflicts. As I like to say, language is too simple to describe infinitely complex reality.
Lack of critical thinking and education.
Without developed critical thinking, without a quality education, people will rely on all sorts of stereotypes, generalizations about other groups. They will more likely to believe in propaganda, they are less likely to question their beliefs, and they are more likely to evaluate the quality of an evidence poorly. And these people also can get hooked on those low-quality information sources that will be pumping them with all sorts of nonsense. This will make things a lot worse.
Propaganda.
The very fact that propaganda has existed for centuries proves that it really influences the minds of people. And if propaganda was to create an external enemy, it can easily do so. especially if the population is not highly educated. There are many different tricks for this: dehumanization, promoting us with them narratives, creating negative image of the enemy, selective presentation of information. The government can literally invade another country, make the local population angry, and then show on TV the most aggressive one, the most radical ones, and say how much they hate us. Look at them, they're our enemies. And here is a very interesting question: why would the government do that? Why would the government set its population against another country?
Rally around the flag effect.
This is already one of the phenomena of the political sociology, which consists in a sharp increase in support and approval of the action of a national leader during international conflicts and crises. During the presidency of George Bush in America, there were 3 sharp increases in his popularity. The first and the biggest was the terrorist attack of September 11 and the beginning of the war in Afghanistan. The second sharp increase in popularity was during his invasion of Iraq, and the third after the capture of Saddam Hussein. And of course this effect is also observed in other countries. Here psychology plays the main role, and the fact that international crisis very well distracts people from internal problems. The media and the opposition switch their attention to this crisis and stop criticizing the authorities. And the duration of this effect depends on the second factor. As you can understand, bad people in power can take advantage of all this and deliberately create international crisis to raise their approval ratings and the support of the regime. This is especially effective if you control the media in your country, because this effect will last for a longer time in this case. There is even a term called diversionary war. This is exactly when the government wants to create an international crisis in order to raise the approval ratings, raise the support of the regime.
Hopelessness.
And finally, a problem that arises not because of psychology, not because of lack of education or critical thinking. The problem is when all people believe in one thing, you can't really do anything anymore. There are people who understand everything that I just mentioned, but they can't do anything. They cannot explain everything to everyone. So they just involuntarily become a part of this system. So if there are people that divided into 2 groups and they started to conflict between each other, you can't break this vicious circle alone. You can't really do anything, and you just become involuntarily a part of this system. As you can see, out-group hostility has a complex psychological origin. If all people understood all this, the world would be completely different. But I want to repeat one more time that I do not suggest to completely forget about any group identities and say that we are all people, let's think about only our shared humanity. There is no need to go from one extreme to another extreme. We need to find the balance.